Hey guys, welcome back to another PS2 Memories video. Here we are actually taking a look at Resident Evil Outbreak. This was actually a spin-off to the Resident Evil universe, but it's still set within the surroundings of Raccoon City, based during the T-virus outbreak in 1998. And it kind of portrays the story of multiple protagonists in the actual game, but they have their own kind of set outlook and story elements within the game. It pretty much tells the story from a different perspective in the Resident Evil series, but again through the eyes of different types of characters that are kind of all forced together during the outbreak, and their goal is pretty much to survive. So you can end up in different types of environments, also kind of revisiting similar type of environments within the game. The game itself was actually broken up into two separate parts. There was also like Outbreak File 2 that was released a year later, and it pretty much continues on the premise of all the characters in the game trying to escape the city and what they actually got up to. So by revisiting other locations in the game as well, so they kind of continued on the story. So it was actually quite a good feature to actually have in the game, that it didn't just follow the entire storyline of the first three games, that it actually tried to put a different spin on it and tried to give you different outlooks of the outbreak in Raccoon City during that time period. The original game itself was actually released in 2003 on the PlayStation, with the second game being released a year later in 2004. But it's also the first Resident Evil game in the series to use the use of co-op features within the game. And primarily it was originally intended to have online features. The Japanese and North American versions did have online features on the PlayStation 2, that you could actually play it online with other people through the likes of servers and networking and so forth, but that element was actually removed from the likes of the European version, as not many gamers played online games on consoles back in those days. But not only that, the internet capabilities in Europe would not have been as good back then as they are today, not compared to what they were on later consoles and even modern consoles. So Japan really only kind of had that element where they could actually be able to utilize that, and a lot more gamers would have been in that region anyway, so they would have had more access to all of those features. Whereas in other regions, people weren't really familiar with online gaming unless you were playing on the likes of PC. So it was still very, very new and an early concept at the time. But it was also pretty much one of the earlier games on consoles to really kind of break the mold, to try and go into that kind of era and that area of co-op or online co-op gameplay. And for the most part, it actually works quite well. It's just a pity that the online features weren't available, because it could have added so much more depth to the game. But that's not to take away that it's actually a bad game. It's actually not. It's definitely typical of the old school Resident Evil style games, where it uses the fixed camera angles, but you're playing from different perspectives with different characters, each with their own unique abilities. Some characters have access to better weapons and melee combat abilities, while others can actually manipulate certain elements and use items at will to be able to create like other specific items or keys or whatever it is to help you move forward. Other characters may have access to more inventory space, or maybe even use likes of lockpicks to gain access to areas that other characters actually can't get into. So it definitely does actually add a lot of replayability, because there's areas and elements in the game that you may not be able to notice or even overlook the first time you play it. It's not until you go through it with each character and you do a bit of exploration that you can actually access a lot of those areas. But the fact is, with the online elements being taken out of the game in the likes of the American and European regions, it left a lot to the individual player themselves to try and figure that out. But again, the one thing that was different compared to some of the other games is that you pretty much were timed to some degree in the game on each of the levels, because the time was pretty much presented in the form of virus, and the virus was spreading, and the infection rate would go up the longer you spent on the level, so you had to try and pretty much complete the level before it was finished. Now that added to the intensity factor of the game, but again it definitely limited the amount of time you had to explore different areas, and especially when you're only playing as one player, it definitely made it a lot harder. Now you did have other characters running around the level with you that could help you. Sometimes it could actually work in your favour, but other times it could be a hindrance, because they were controlled by the computer AI, and a lot of the times they had a tendency to go off and do their own thing. So even when you tried to get them to help you, a lot of the times they either would or they wouldn't. So that could definitely have an effect on your actual gameplay or how you progress through each of the levels. Sometimes good, sometimes bad. It all depended on the experience itself. But I definitely think that if there was online features involved in the game, it definitely would have made the playthroughs a bit more adaptive and pretty much probably easier. It is definitely one of those games that is highly wanted pretty much as a remake for like some modern consoles with the online features, as at its time when it was released, the game was actually pretty much ahead of its time, probably too much so, and the fact is that the hardware wasn't able to really fully support the capabilities that was actually in the game, so in a lot of ways it was actually a wasted experience to some degree. But that's not to take away, like I mentioned, that they're bad games. They're actually really, really good games, and they are deserving of a remake. If anything, a lot of these games here, especially the Outbreak games, would actually do really well on consoles today, because of the co-op aspect of it, and the fact is that technology has come a long way in the last 15-16 years since it's actually been released, which to think of it is actually quite crazy. Recording this video, that's how long ago it actually was. But the game itself does have a lot of its own things going for it, because again, it's set during the same time period as Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3, so players will instantly be familiar with the likes of the aesthetic and even the background style and the vibe of the actual game. So you will be very familiar with the concept of the actual kind of like storyline, because it is based within that same kind of environment or world within the Raccoon City incident. It's just kind of telling it from a different perspective. You're getting to see a lot more of what went on outside of the realms of the main characters in the game. So it is a nice touch, and it is a unique feature. Plus, it's also a good way to prolong the story, because a lot of the things with the likes of the Resident Evil franchises, they do revisit the Raccoon City incident quite a bit, but this was definitely one of the best ways to retell or to revisit that story, but and tell it from a different perspective. Plus, it gives you the opportunity pretty much to actually play through it in real time, so that you can have a direct influence as to what goes on, which is actually a neat feature. You get access to like a ton of different weapons, items and locations to visit and to collect as you go through. Each thing that you do collect will have a direct influence on how you actually play the game. So you do have to conserve ammo, you do have to do puzzles, enter passwords, and do all the bits and pieces that you're familiar with within the Resident Evil games to be able to move forward onto the next section. Plus, it also has access to a load of cool like movie style quality intros with loads of explosions and like a lot of violence as well. So there's definitely something there to really cater for all your individual tastes, and especially if you're a big fan of these type of games, there's definitely a lot on offer here. So I'd love to know your thoughts on Resident Evil Outbreak for the PlayStation 2. Have you actually played it, and do you think it's a good kind of follow on to the original games on the PlayStation 1? Make sure to share your thoughts down in the comments below. So if you have enjoyed this video and you'd like to see more videos on games like this here, like more survival horror games on the PlayStation 2 and so forth, then be sure to leave a like, and also make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to be updated of future videos. Also be sure to check out some of the other videos on screen here that will show similar gameplay from other types of games, likes of Resident Evil and other games within the survival horror genre, and see if you enjoy them. And as always, keep those gaming memories alive.